Good afternoon, everyone. Before we begin, let us first put ourselves in the presence of God and thereafter pay homage to our flag and country as we sing the Philippine national anthem. Please rise. Let us all bow our heads for the ecumenical prayer.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فقال ربكم ادعوني أستجب لكم آمين يا رب العالمين الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين اللهم اجمع شامل المسلمين والكريستيان والأمة في مدينة دباو وسلم دائما مجتمعنا هذا بالسلم والأمن والتقدم في بلدنا هذا آمين يا رب العالمين ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب ربنا إنك أنت الوهاب ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وصلى الله على خير خلقه سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين آمين يا رب العالمين.
In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Our most gracious Heavenly Father, we come to you today to praise and worship you and give you thanks for all the things you continue to provide for ourselves and our families. Father, we humbly ask for forgiveness for all the times we have offended you, when we forget to acknowledge your presence in the image of our brothers and sisters, and for moments we fail to be good stewards of the blessings you have given us. Continue to guide and protect each one of us, Lord, that we may always walk in the lights of your everlasting love and mercy. Grant us, Father, with your comfort in times of distress and with your strength in times of weakness. Bestow upon us your unending grace and healing, that we may in turn become instruments of gentleness and compassion to others. We ask all this in the name of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, with the prayer and the intercession of our Blessed Mother. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Philippine National Anthem.
Tumayo po tayong lahat at sabay-sabay nating awitin ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Ayaw magiging dala sa silanganan, alam ng puso, sa digit mo'y buhay. Lupang hihirang, gulatan ng magiging, sa manlulupin, di ka masisingil. Sa nagatak lubog sa sigal at sa langit mong bahag, may ginanang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang isang ng matawag mo'y talumpay na naglilingin, ang bituin at araw ng kailan pa may matinig. Lumalang araw ng 100% buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang higaya ng pagpay makakamit, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
You may now take your seats. We now turn you over to the host and moderator of today's multi-stakeholder forum, a highly experienced professional with extensive regional and international experience in journalism, press freedom, and media independence. He became the first executive director of the Southeast Asian Press Alliance and has served on the advisory board of the Program for Independent Journalism of the Open Society Foundation. He is now with International Media Support, IMS, based out of Copenhagen. Currently Program Manager for the Philippines and Cambodia. At the end of 2019, he had departed all his executive corporate positions to focus on his startup, an audio streaming and podcast-focused production company called Puma Public. Ladies and gentlemen, your host, Mr. Robbie Alampay.
Good day, magandang araw po sa kanila lahat. Ako po si Robbie Alampay and welcome to this afternoon's multi-stakeholder forum on the Philippines' commitments to the 2019 Nairobi Summit on ICPD at 25, Ways Forward to Accelerate the Pace. This program is supported by the UN Population Fund, or UNFPA, and the national government in collaboration with the Department of Health, the Commission on Population, and other government agencies. Today's National Forum is being held to understand the 3 transformative results, as well as the multi-stakeholder reflections on ways forward to accelerate its pace before 2030. Now, before we move on, we'd like to acknowledge those in attendance this afternoon. You, please raise your hand if you are part of our senior officials and dignitaries from government. May we acknowledge our officials, representatives from government. Select ambassadors from various organizations and agencies. The young people, the youth, everybody stand up. Members, of course, of our civil society. Maraming salamat po sa kanila. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We will be discussing timely matters, especially, of course, as you already know, related to accelerating the attainment of our 3 transformative results from a global lens. Again, maraming salamat po for joining us. Now, on to our ceremony. We'd like to start off with a welcome message, of course, from our hosts today, coming from the Vice President of the University of the Philippines. Let's call on Dr. Elena Pernia. Dr. Pernia.
Thank you, Robbie, and welcome to everybody here this afternoon. On behalf of the University of the Philippines and our president, Danilo L. Concepcion, who is currently overseas, I am so pleased to welcome you all to Diliman for this United Nations Population Fund multi-stakeholder forum on accelerating the Philippines' commitments in the 2019 Nairobi Summit on ICPD at 25. I especially welcome our distinguished speakers for the day, Dr. Natalia Kamen, UN Undersecretary General and UNFPA Executive Director. Let me also welcome, as you yourselves have acknowledged when Robbie introduced you, our distinguished guests from the diplomatic corps, international organizations, government agencies, and civil society organizations, and most especially, my colleagues in the academe. Warm greetings to all, and it's always a joy for the university to welcome people from all over the country, all over the world, to share ideas, and particularly in this afternoon's topic, the betterment of the population. Please know that we always welcome such gatherings. As the country's national university, UP has been at the forefront of the national campaign to advance women's rights, reproductive health, and gender equality. To cite a most recent development, the UP Philippine General Hospital's Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology launched the Division of Sexual Health in November 2021. This unit is the first of its kind in the country and aims to promote wellness and address pathologic conditions on sexual and reproductive health. As the largest tertiary state-owned hospital in the country, the UP-PGH treats thousands of patients every year, many of whom come from marginalized and underserved communities. Through the Division of Sexual Health, these patients can access a range of high-quality services, including information and counseling for sexual relationship problems, sexual health education, and assistance for victims of sexual violence and harmful practices. Concerning research and policy advocacy on issues about population, poverty, and sustainable development, many of our faculty and researchers, departments, institutes, and colleges, all within the UP system, have been actively involved since the 1970s, when the appreciation and recognition of the fundamental role of population in the development process began to be recognized. Our scientists, our medical researchers, from anthropology, sociology, demography, economics, social work, and community development, to name a few of the social sciences, have been in the forefront of such studies, recommending various approaches for sustainable development. Among other units of the UP Population Institute leads in the creation and dissemination of knowledge in the population field and in the application of such knowledge in development planning and program management. Likewise, the distinguished faculty of the UP School of Economics over the years have made invaluable contributions to the public discussions and policy formulations on population, poverty, and development challenges. The UP Center, many of the prime movers in civil society, academia, private business, and government sector, including past and current NEDA secretaries, are alumni of the UPSE. The UP Center for Women's and Gender Studies is the lead institution in the university and the country for gender equality and women's issues, offering training and outreach programs on gender sensitivity and gender mainstreaming for educational institutions, government agencies, civil society groups, and feminist and gender-sensitive peer counseling and psychosocial assistance for women and LGBTQIA+ persons. And then I'd like to cite my own college, the UP College of Mass Communication, for its contributions to communication efforts regarding population management, gender rights, and sustainable development, among others. As UP joins the country and the world in celebrating Women's Month, we also saw that the national anthem featured women in all sectors of service. We welcome this opportunity to connect with our colleagues and partners in the UNFPA, in our partners in national and local governments and civil society. After all, we all share one vision for women and men, girls and boys. To paraphrase the words of President and CEO of Pathfinder International, Purnima Mane, a world full of empowered women and girls is a world where everyone thrives. Thank you very much for your presence this afternoon and welcome once again to the University of the Philippines, Diliman Campus. Mabuhay. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat po, Dr. Elena Pernia. Now for our opening message, we'd like to call on the Undersecretary of the National Economic and Development Authority, or NEDA. Let's call on Undersecretary Mike De La Rosa.
Good afternoon to our esteemed delegates and participants to this forum. On behalf of Secretary Carl Kendrick Chua of the National Economic and Development Authority, we would like to thank UNFPA for inviting the National Economic and Development Authority to give the opening message in this timely forum on the Philippines' commitment to the 2019 Nairobi Summit, Ways Forward to Accelerate the Pace. The Philippines is highly committed and focused on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the vision of the International Conference on Population and Development and the unfinished agenda of the ICPD Program of Action. The Philippine government has developed the Ambition 2040 and the Philippine Development Plan as the roadmap to achieve these goals. Equally, we uphold our commitments for the Nairobi Summit. The Philippines' commitment to the ICPD agenda is reflected in these plans, policies, programs, and is aligned with the aim of reaping the demographic dividend. The three transformative goals, zero gender-based violence, zero maternal deaths, and zero unmet need for family planning, including zero adolescent pregnancy, have been and will continue to be in the country's development plan. In a few months, we will be transitioning to a new administration, and preparations for the next Philippine Development Plan, the country's medium-term plan, will take place. Regardless, the Philippine Development Plan will always be anchored on the collective ambition of the Filipino people. In English, the vision is that for the next 24 years, Filipinos will enjoy a stable and comfortable lifestyle and will have equal opportunities. Citizens will not be burdened by poverty or hunger and have equal opportunities, and the Philippines will be a predominantly middle-class society. This is the Ambition 2040 slogan, matatag, baginhawa, at panatag na buhay. The attainment of this vision is parallel to that of the country's commitment to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals and ensure that no one is left behind. And at the heart of the SDGs are the goals set in the ICPD Program of Action. For vulnerable women and girls, the priorities are the three transformative goals in addressing gender-based violence, unmet need for family planning, maternal deaths, and adolescent pregnancy. Attaining these goals by prioritizing the needs of women and girls shall consequently allow for women and girls to live in safety and good health in an environment that supports and honors their empowerment. This consequently enables them and their children to have better opportunities and possibilities of the future as productive and thriving members of their communities. Although we might have some setbacks brought upon by the pandemic and the most recent devastation brought upon by Typhoon Odette, we acknowledge the critical importance of continuing to strive to achieve these commitments. We remain committed to our commitments made during the 2019 summit in Nairobi to fully implement our responsible and reproductive health care and the universal health care laws, with emphasis on drastically reducing unmet need for modern family planning, adolescent pregnancy, and HIV/AIDS infections. Number two, to accelerate integrated effort to reach and optimize the demographic dividend for the country through scaling up of maternal and infant health programs in the first 1,000 days of life. And three, to reduce poverty to 14%. And finally, to increase investments and cooperation for reproductive health care and other interventions needed to accelerate the goals of ICPD and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Lastly, in April this year, probably three weeks from now, the Philippines will be the chair of the 55th Commission on Population and Development with the theme, Population and Sustainable Development, in particular, sustained and inclusive economic growth. The theme is very timely, given that while the country has experienced significant economic growth the past decade, there is a need to work on ensuring that no one is left behind. Building on the legacy of the late Rafael Salas, the Philippines take this opportunity as the chair to be able to unify and lead the various member states in the acceleration of the statement of the three transformative goals and build partnerships with other countries globally to attain our common goal for sustained and inclusive economic growth. With this, maraming salamat at mabuhay tayong lahat.
Many thanks, Undersecretary Mike De La Rosa of NEDA. Moving on with her message and also to introduce the keynote speaker for this forum, let's all welcome UNFPA representative to the Philippines, Dr. Leila Judan.
Thank you very much. Vice President Elena Pernilla, Undersecretary Miguel De La Rosa, distinguished guests from the government, from the diplomatic corps, my colleagues from the UN, civil society, the academia, media, young people, good afternoon. UNFPA Philippines is much pleased to see all of you in this multi-stakeholder forum on the Philippine commitments in the 2019 Nairobi Summit and ICPD +25. We really want to extend our gratitude to the University of the Philippines, the premier state education institution in the country, for hosting and welcoming all of us here today. We also thank the government of the Philippines, represented today by NEDA, for leading the Philippines to achieve the ICPD plan of action and the commitment made in Nairobi. Thank you for being with us in this journey. So 2 years and 5 months after the Nairobi summit, we found it timely to express on support to the Philippine government's commitment to accelerate the achievement of the 3 transformative results, which are ending unmet need for family planning, ending preventable maternal death, and ending gender-based violence and all forms of harmful practices, such as child marriage, as well ending the adolescent pregnancy here in the Philippines. We added, we talk about 3-0 and plus. The plus, we need to end the adolescent pregnancy here in the Philippines. This forum seeks to gather insights from different perspectives on achievements, remaining key challenges, and concrete practical ways of accelerating the achievement of these results before 2030, the end of the Sustainable Development Goals in a middle-income country such as the Philippines. We view these 3 transformative results, as well as ending adolescent pregnancy, as important in achieving the SDGs, whether in normal development, humanitarian, or peace-building settings, popularly referred to as the triple nexus. We, in UNFPA, believe that it's through the concrete action of everyone from different sectors that these results are achievable. We just need to believe and act timely and concretely with the leadership of a government. At this point, let me introduce our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker is the United Nations Under-Secretary General and Executive Director of the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, the United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency. She has more than 30 years of strategic leadership experience in the fields of preventive medicine, public and reproductive health, social justice, and philanthropy. She joined UNFPA as Executive Director in 2017. Let me tell you that we are really pleased to have our Executive Director today with us. She is the first Executive Director that came to the Philippines after the COVID-19 situation and the super typhoon Odette. So thank you, Natalia, for joining us today. Please.
Well, Dr. Leila, I must thank you for that very kind introduction. Madam Vice President, Mr. Undersecretary, Excellencies, the CSO leaders here present, government officials, young leaders, Salamat, greetings of peace. Peace indeed is the noble purpose of the United Nations, and peace is what our world sorely needs today. We're here to discuss accelerating the pace as we move forward on the 3 transformative zeros to ICPD. 1, 2, 3. I'm really pleased to be in a country where ideas have currency, where one can listen to someone like Sir Ben de Leon, an original Salas boy. I'm so delighted to be here and meet you today. Moreover, at the Nairobi Summit on ICPD, and I think Dr. JP can back me up on this, the Philippines was on the move. The march continues now As we still look towards 2030, as we accelerate progress on those commitments that we made in Nairobi, and they are noble commitments indeed, that will bring health and happiness and participation to women and young people, not just here in Filipinas, but all around the world. In 2019, we gathered almost 10,000 strong, this was pre-COVID, to recommit to the extraordinary vision of that ICPD program of action set forth in Cairo in the year 1994. And in that International Conference on Population and Development, a vision was set forth of full equality for women and girls, and of sexual and reproductive health and rights for everyone. And when we convened in Nairobi, our central belief was that progress that's good is not good enough, that we must accelerate the completion and fulfill those promises that were made to girls, to women, to young people, to everyone in Cairo in 1994, and understanding that Agenda 2030 and the sustainable progress of the planet depends on that 1, 2, 3. Modern contraception, a priority for women in the Philippines, I've been told. Ending death during childbirth and making sure that women, girls, young people, anyone considered different because of ability or sexual diversities are respected, that harmful practices will come to an end. And to this end, it's been governments, it's been the business community, it's been the solidarity of many nations, some represented here today. It's been private foundations and the civil society that analyzes, that advocates, and that has the courage to stand up for someone who might otherwise be left behind. Now, as we see these 3 transformative zeros, the Philippine government has participated actively to reaffirm and reinforce the validity of these international commitments to improve reproductive health programs in this country and to recognize the alignment of the 3 zeros with the Ambition Natin 2040, the long-term vision here for a stable, peaceful, secure, and comfortable life that Filipinos so well deserve. And among the commitments, government pledged to reduce unmet need for family planning and address adolescent pregnancy. Understanding that for every pregnancy and birth to be wanted will mean that every Filipino can contribute productively to national development. And our founding director of the United Nations Population Fund, Mr. Rafael M. Salas, affirmed long before others had that vision to see in the distance that, quote, parents have a basic human right to determine freely and responsibly the number and spacing of their children. His focus was to address inequalities, and that's how one lays the foundation for prosperity. He truly was ahead of his time in recognizing the interlinkages among population, gender relations, environmental sustainability, demographic patterns, religion, and economic growth. And that understanding continues to inform our work in UNFPA today. Our aspiration is not just for women and girls alone. Women and girls are the backbone of society. What's good for them is going to be good for the nation. And we must admit that globally, we're still falling short. We're falling short when it comes to sexual and reproductive health and rights, and we're in an era that is besieged by upheaval, by conflicts, by misinformation, by natural disasters, as I witnessed just yesterday in southern Leyte. And on the political front, the issues that affect women and girls should not be controversial. They should not be taboo. This is where I expect our civil society to continue to stand in solidarity with those who might not otherwise have a voice to be heard. As I speak, somewhere on the coast of this beautiful archipelago, but it could be anywhere in the world, because it's going to happen 20,000 times today, a girl is sitting terrified and alone. She's going to find that she is pregnant. Her prospects for resuming her education, dim. Her opportunity to find decent work and fulfill her potential, diminished. Her future, uncertain. And where is the older man creating this predicament for her? Nowhere to be found. She's been abandoned, and she's the one who's going to bear the stigma. She's the one that's going to bear the responsibility. And every year around the world, more than 7 million babies are born to girls who are mere children themselves. And this is a global issue. This is a national issue. This is a local issue. This is an issue for all of us. And somewhere else, there's a woman suffering obstructed labor. Does she know that her baby's life and her own are in danger? The nearest health facility may have been destroyed by something like a typhoon. How is the midwife going to access this lady? Will she live to hear her newborn's first cries? Somewhere else, after COVID, a girl is hearing her mother being victimized by domestic violence, fearing for her own safety, and is there anyone going to be there when the hotline number is called? This is what preoccupies all of us and UNFPA as we look to, yes, tremendous progress on SRHR, but we also know that we have to gather the political will to fulfill human rights for every woman, girl, every person on the planet, including right here in the Philippines. I must commend government partners, all of us working together, in a country where we've seen a decline in maternal deaths, in a country where there's a greater proportion of women who do have access to modern methods of family planning of their choice. And over the past decade, the proportion of women who marry as children has come down, as along with the percentage worldwide of girls affected by harmful practices such as female genital mutilation. While praising success, we also have to understand that the solutions for the next steps on the march forward are in our hands. On a day when more than 800 women will die due to preventable causes of pregnancy and childbirth, on a day where more than 250 million women who want to avoid pregnancy and are asking for modern methods still have no access. Universal health coverage is part of that answer. And as we move forward, UNFPA will continue to support this government to see that teen marriage, teen pregnancy, and the questions of full respect and an end to gender-based violence will spring to life in the country. Grim statistics demand creative, concerted, collaborative action, and the statistics can change, and they must change. Not 50 years from now, not 25 years from now, certainly by 2030. In the shadow of a pandemic, the question is, how do we prioritize together? What actions can we take? How can we fulfill the commitments made? And ask ourselves how to accelerate progress to move faster. Thank you to all of you for your presence here today. It's a pride to UNFPA that we do find willing hands to work together when it comes to these vital issues. I look forward personally to learning more from your shared insights and the fruitful discussion of the panelists. I assure you that UNFPA continues on the march alongside you, and that the people of the Philippines, especially women and young people, indigenous peoples, people with disabilities, and anyone at risk of being left out or pushed back or left behind, has a friend in UNFPA. The 1, 2, 3 transformative actions, I believe, can and will and must make a difference for a healthier, better world in the immediate future to come. Thank you very much indeed for listening. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Natalia Canem, UN Undersecretary General and UNFPA Executive Director. Lots to unbundle, lots to talk about, of course. And to that end, we do have a panel of experts joining me on stage this afternoon. I'd like to call them to join me, please, on stage. To help us discuss the topic of unmet needs for family planning, we have the Undersecretary and Executive Director of the Population Commission, Dr. Juan Antonio G.P. Perez. To discuss the topic of preventable maternal deaths, we have the Executive Director of Likhaan Center for Women's Health, Dr. Junis Melgar. And to help us talk about gender-based violence, particularly in post-disaster situations and COVID-19, we have the Senior Social Development Specialist from the Asian Development Bank, Ms. Zonibel Woods. And finally, to help us discuss the topic of adolescent pregnancies and child marriage, She Decides Philippines Vice Chairperson, Ms. Jonna Turalde. Everybody, please have a seat. Maraming salamat for joining us. Okay, I want to start off. If you don't mind, I'll take it in this order. I speak with Dr. GP quite a lot in our program, and of course, population is something that we constantly watch. But for everyone, I guess I want to start with this. Just watching it as an outsider. Then I hear the targets, 0, 0, 0. No? Doesn't matter when that's going to happen, but of course 0 sounds, frankly, a very tough challenge. Maybe just give us an idea first. Where did that number start? Where are we right now relative to 0?
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Roby. Our starting point, let's say, could have been 2016 when this administration came in. When you talk about unmet need for family planning, we were about 6 million people away from 0. You talk about preventable maternal death, we were about 2,000 to 3,000 women away from 0.
Per year.
Per year, our annual figure. And if it's violence against women, I believe based on our annual reports in the RPRH law, the numbers were close to, and this is combined women and children, violence against women and children, it was around 25,000 to 30,000 away from 0. So the numbers are quite large. If you talk about the journey from where we were in 2016 to today.
Okay. Does anybody want to qualify, add any numbers, any baseline data for us to, so we know where we're starting from? We're okay. Yes, Doctora. Dr. Junis Melgar of the Likhaan Center for Women's Health.
Let me talk about maternal mortality ratio. No? This was a core issue that we pushed when we were fighting for the RH law. When we started, I think the PSA, and there are difference in the counting. We were, the last survey, I think in 2003 was, maybe later was 221 per 100,000. But now the UN in 2017, this is a different estimate. So I don't know if we can compare. The UN together with UNFPA, World Bank, estimated a drop from 2000 of about 2.3%, from 160 to 121. So that should be good news. Except that the recommended decline, annual decline, is 5%. And we were only 2 points. Pero, yeah, pwede na din.
Sige, but let's be okay. Let's take the optimistic side of looking at this. I do have to admit, as a journalist, and GP knows this, I tend to attack from the pessimistic side, and I always ask, what's the problem? What's keeping us from doing that? But the theme for our discussion right now is accelerating. So I'll take it from there. How do we accelerate? What are the points of intervention that for you are key where we can actually accelerate? Anyone?
Let me venture.
Sige.
Because I guess for much of the work in this area, it's government that has been given the lead task. No? So the acceleration has to happen in the human resource area. We still lack health workers doing family planning, population work at community level. There are 44,000 barangays that need to be covered. Also on the resource side, we need to sustain the resources needed by women who are availing of family planning. Right now, we now have 8 million women and couples using some method of family planning. And we were only at barely 4 million in 2013 when we started implementing the law, the RPRH law. So we've doubled the number of users of family planning, and the resources need to nearly double.
Okay.
Human and financial resources. They need to be in place.
Okay, and to that point, Dr. Canem did mention the role of private sector and civil society in boosting that resource as well. But I wanted to ask Zonibel as well as Jonah. GP was mentioning resources, but let's assume resources are there. Let's assume resources are actually going up. But once resources are on ground level, what else is there other than the material resource being there, maybe even human resource being there? What are the challenges despite, notwithstanding all of that being supplied?
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is, that's working. You were asking what is preventing us from accelerating progress on maternal health, for example, and you've also brought up gender-based violence. I think one key issue is addressing persistent gender norms that are, that continue to promote this unequal relationship between men and women. And even in countries where you have, countries in the north, in the global north, who different economies, you still have this pervasive gender-based violence that exists. And what does that tell us? That basically tells us that it's not a problem of necessarily just resources. It's a problem of changing a culture that considers women and girls less than human beings, and that their human rights are not being upheld.
Give us an example. What does that look like, let's say, at the barangay health center or wherever? What does that look like on the ground, face-to-face, with a woman, for example, or a young girl who comes and asks for help even just advice. But when you talk about persistent societal norms and even cultural problems, give us an example. Tell us a story. Paint us a picture of how problematic that can be on the ground.
I'll give you a very personal example. A few months ago, there was a case of a woman being, what sounded like a woman being assaulted in my village, in my community, and I called my village police to come and intervene. It actually took about 45 minutes before anyone would actually check to make sure that that woman was okay. And it took multiple calls from me asking for the village police to come and make sure that she was okay, and threatening that I would call the barangay, and actually citing what the law says about protecting women. So you may be able to have the laws in existence, but you do actually need to make sure that people are aware, all kinds of service providers, not just health providers, but across the board, that they are aware of what the law is and what they need to do and the responsibility to implement it.
Jonah, again, is with the She Decides Philippines. She's vice chairperson. When it comes to adolescent pregnancies and child marriage, what does that translate to? How do you see that on the ground?
Yeah, so for adolescent pregnancies, I think during the pandemic, young people were actually doing peer education and also different interventions to young people and adolescent mothers. But I think it was actually adolescent parents or adolescents who are actually asking and demanding for services. But unfortunately, there are instances that healthcare providers aren't sensitive enough in the needs of adolescents. And I think that's one of the challenges that we're still facing, different norm and structural and cultural barriers that's still happening.
And to that point, I mean, GP alluded to that resource. The fact is, legal structures have also changed. There have been a lot of key reforms as well. But June is when we take into consideration that, okay, you could have women's desks, right? You could have resources. You could even have local governments that are now much more progressive and a lot more, let's say, just free to implement as the laws required, not even feeling the pressure anymore from, let's say, the Catholic Church or religious groups. But when you take into consideration the barriers at the cultural, societal, community, maybe even family level. Yes?
I think I need to talk because for maternal mortality, actually very key there is the vitality of the health system and the respect of the health system for women. And any perpetuation of maternal mortality, because many pregnancies are preventable, actually. There should be zero. Anytime you have maternal mortality, it speaks of a neglect, a systemic neglect of women. And I think in our country, the health system has not really paid attention to women. Even in our work, for example, there is a lot of women are reluctant to go to health system, healthcare hospitals, for example, if they have complications. Because number one, they think that they will be discriminated against because they're poor.
Yeah.
Number two, marami silang anak that they don't want to leave behind.
Okay.
And the third one is I think they also normalize complicated deliveries. They think that with not political will, but with sheer willpower, women can overcome complications. And doctors know that they can die, but the women would say, kakayanin ko yan.
Yeah.
So that cultural barrier, I think that has to be addressed. Maybe the health system is not the best way to address that. But that's why maternal mortality has to be led by the health system, because the health system will have the interventions that are known to prevent death, no? Like blood transfusion, mga magnesium sulfate, etc., all these IV line and IV medicines. But you need to convince the women
Yeah.
to go and seek care.
But to that point, when we talk about access or accessibility, is that factored in? Or is access literally just, counting how many units of this that we have for every targeted and potential need? But we talk about, a woman who knows it might be there, but I can't even leave my home because I have 5 other kids to take care of. Well, how does that count as access?
Yes, well, when it comes to access, we have a legal barrier right now for adolescents who seek help. No? There is the need for parental consent for adolescents below 18 who need some kind of service from a health center that is not as friendly as some might think. So we need to address that. That's a legal barrier. But we are coming up with workaround solutions to that because we know that when the Supreme Court put in that barrier, we saw an uptick in adolescent pregnancies. But what we need is a comprehensive approach that works around that barrier, that addresses cultural, societal issues, but very key to providing access to adolescents and women are our local chief executives.
Okay.
The mayors, in particular, in highly urbanized cities, we've started mobilizing them.
You qualify that with highly urbanized cities.
Well, we have Cagayan de Oro in Mindanao, Dipolog in Zamboanga, and Puerto Princesa in Palawan. The mayors there have agreed to put access of adolescents, in particular, to services as their priority.
Yeah, but
And they mobilized the other government agencies on that.
sige.
But it's still a few. It's
Yeah, but
not enough.
I'll get to Zonibel and Jonah, but how is that a workaround on the legal barriers?
Well, what happens is the health workers become more attuned to the situation of adolescents.
Okay.
If they discover an adolescent child is pregnant, and they're probably going to be the first to see that.
Okay.
So they will reach out to the community. That's why they work with social workers, with barangay leaders, with somebody. So, in a way, it's a more comprehensive approach. It's not health alone.
Yeah.
But that is still a workaround solution for a problem that could be solved.
But Zonibel
legislation.
and Jonah, but also just to make it a little bit more complicated. We're talking about, in this particular situation, if I'm getting this right, we're talking about young women who, even within their own family, and then their street, and then their neighbors, their family, there are so many barriers to get around. Maybe even their own strength and self-esteem. So many barriers to overcome there already. And yet we're only talking about women who are already in that situation, right? Who are already in that situation of either being pregnant at a very young age or already being abused at a very young age. So we're not even talking about prevention at this stage. But you wanted to say something.
Yeah. Actually, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Actually, on that issue, I wanted to come in earlier. And, one of the issues that UNFPA and others have been working on for a long time is comprehensive sexuality education for young people that are both in school and out of school. And I think this is a critical discussion that we need to have, that comprehensive sexuality education needs to be based on science, that it needs to be, of course, appropriate to the evolving capacities of children and young people, but it needs to start early. So when you were talking about a comprehensive approach, the education system really has a huge role to play in that. And one of the challenges from the COVID pandemic was that young people were not going necessarily to school, were not able to go to school and get that kind of information that they needed, even though whether it was informal or not. And then teachers who usually pick up on cases of abuse and may be able to refer to services, we're not directly seeing those young people to be able to refer them to services. And then we have a new area of potential abuse, which is cyber harassment and stalking and violence that particularly young women were having to experience, throughout this COVID, and it's increasing. So I think we need to address this issue across many fronts, including the education, but also through laws that deal with information technology and so on. So it's really about a comprehensive approach.
Yeah, I just want to add, just going back to about the legal barrier on parental consent, I think the elephant in the room is really, in the Philippine context, we don't recognize adolescents' bodily autonomy and looking at their best interests. I think it's in our Convention on the Rights of the Child that adolescents have evolving capacities, and I think it's something that is not being talked about effectively not effectively but directly in the Philippines, and that would be also that would inform the current that would inform our method of comprehensive sexuality education. That it should be formalized and institutionalized in the country.
Just to make it very explicit here, just to make progress on reproductive health, we had to overcome a lot of social barriers and a lot of cultural forces. Sexuality and normalizing ownership over yourself crosses another line that we haven't even begun to cross with reproductive health. Am I correct?
Yes, I think that's why I wanted to balance the conversation, because it's important to have protection for young people, especially those subject to violence. But we also need to be very positive about sexuality. Some of them are really, and in the Philippines, I need to clarify, only 15% or less of our adolescents are sexually active, and yet they are the ones that get into adolescent pregnancy. So it's true that maybe in comprehensive sexuality education, there would be a part there about preventing, waiting for the moment, etc. But for the sexually active young people, these are the minority, contrary to what our people are spreading, that we have a promiscuous lot in the Philippines. We have that, but we need to attend to those because these are the ones who need contraceptives. No? And many of them are 18 above, but there is this blanket prohibition, which is an artificial prohibition, because when you look closely at the law, and we had no less than Congressman Lagman interpret this law requiring parental consent, he said there seems to be an omnibus requirement for NGOs and private, but there is no penalty. There's no crime. It's not a crime. And therefore, I would urge all advocates here and practitioners, let us act in behalf of the young people. So we need to continue to provide them with services. We cannot make artificial barriers like that bar young people. So I think also positive sexuality is very important. Hopefully it will be a balance of protection and also acceptance that it is an important part of being human. Diba?
Yeah. GP, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I know that that is a discussion between government and CSOs, but what I see happening on the ground is that the health services now recognize that reproductive health services may be needed by 10 to 14-year-olds. So they're now counted in the listing. So the health centers now include young people in the, because typically we just look at 15 to 49. The below 15 were never considered, but now they are in the list. So at least there is that movement there. If we could accelerate faster. And then by knowing that even these young people have problems, the health services can adapt.
Okay.
So it's a beginning.
We don't have a lot of time left, unfortunately, but I am curious, and maybe this is by way also of bringing in the component as well of information, education, and for that matter, I'll speak for my sector, for media, that when we try to bring it as well to the level of prevention, education, information, access to all of this is so crucial as well. But I'm curious, if they can't get that at this point from completely from the education system, if they can't even get their information from family, and there are barriers to getting responsible information, whether it's about services or their own rights from their own community, where do our young people get it now? Where do they turn for information and education and access to these services? Would you know?
Well, based on the young adult fertility survey conducted by this university, they get most information from their peers,
Okay.
fellow young people who are probably one text away from knowing
Which
something.
still begs the question, where do their peers get the information?
Yes.
And is it reliable information that they get? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think we have a lot to learn from examples coming from the HIV pandemic, which basically, epidemics, which basically used a lot of peer education as a way to educate young people against HIV. I think that was a really good and well-documented and quite successful model that we can continue to use.
Yeah.
Peer education is, and training youth leaders in order to engage in these conversations is really critically important.
Yeah. Jonah, I'll let you speak, but I just want to cheat a bit and admit, I'm asking this question because I had a conversation recently with Dr. Rica Cruz. As you know, an advocate right now for sexuality and so on. But one of her interventions was, from what she could understand, a lot of these young people are getting their information, they're turning to social media. There's a lot of information from Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. None of it, no judgment on that statement. But she also observed that even when she tries to put up information on Facebook, on YouTube, on TikTok, again, the cultural barriers come in. And in fact, the technological barriers come in. And she's automatically censored. As soon as she puts the word sex, as soon as she puts the word, anything relating to bodily pleasure, to sexual identity, and so on, she's automatically censored, even by these platforms. I just wanted to throw that in. Just one last thing, but yeah, you wanted to also add something.
Yeah, just actually echoing what everyone has said in terms of where we get information. It's actually with peers and social media, but as agreeing with you, Robbie, about how it's being censored, especially when we just mentioned the word sex, vagina, and even the body parts, which should actually be normal and not stigmatized. So I think it's something that we have to work on in terms of ensuring that in sexuality education, it's being talked about directly and visibly.
Okay. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I'm getting a signal that we don't even have time for questions from the audience. I'll apologize for that. But I'd like to thank again Dr. G.P. Perez, Dr. Junis Melgar, Zonibel Woods, and also Jonah Turalde. Maraming salamat. And again, thank you, of course, to all of you, all our guests, all our ambassadors and dignitaries as well for making this a collaborative and insightful discussion. We usher forth towards materializing the Philippines' commitments to understand the three transformative results and to accelerate our pace towards our objectives. We hope that this becomes the start for successful collective efforts towards building effective, accountable institutions at all levels and all sectors. Maraming salamat po. And now to provide us some feedback, we'd like to thank again our panelists. And as they may make their way off the stage to provide us some feedback and insights on our recently concluded panel discussion, as well as to close this forum, we'd like to call on the Regional Director of UNFPA Asia and the Pacific, Mr. Bjorn Anderson, to give us a few words. Mr. Anderson. Thank you so much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, let me start to say all protocols observed. And what an interesting conversation this has been, refreshing. After 2 years, to sit and listen to such insightful comments from 4 panelists working in the Philippines. I am really looking forward to future conversation around the ICPD, the 3 transformative results, and how we can accelerate the pace to achieve them. I would say what I heard is 3 key words in order to be able to accelerate the pace. One is the need for a policy framework, to have the legal context in place. And I think, Dr. Natalia Kanem, you expressed that very well in your introduction. The Philippines have come a long way to be able to have that in place. In addition, Dr. GP, you made it very clear that we need to invest in human resources and to provide necessary funding to the health systems. And I think you, Dr. Melgar, made it very clear the role that the health system and the health services have in order to acknowledge, recognize, and not discriminate women when they are seeking services, whether they are pregnant or seeking services for family planning. It is also very clear that the panel highlighted the importance of social norms and values and gender inequality. We heard from Ms. Woods and Ms. Turalde about the importance to address this upfront, to make sure that we not sustain in any way unequal relationships between men and women. Adolescence became a very clear topic in the conversation, and the need, like you said, Mr. Turalde, about their bodily autonomy, and to make sure that adolescents are provided with services when they are seeking information, and that the education system provide comprehensive sexuality education. The conversation went also way beyond the 3 transformative goals to talk about positive attitudes around sexuality, around the rights of the child and human rights in general. And if I may add, from UNFPA's perspective in the region, unless we provide resources and the political willpower to invest in gender equality, to invest in women's empowerment and their rights, we will not achieve the 3 transformative goals in the region, and we will not achieve the broader aspects of the ICPD program of action. I think, coming to an end with this conversation today, it outlined the needs to not just continue the work and the path that the Philippines is on, but it also goes for all other countries in this region. And I would like to quote also my executive director, who so correctly said in the beginning that it's fantastic to be in a country where where ideas have a currency. And this has been so clear yesterday when we visited South later, and today in various conversations. But it would be a remiss of me to not acknowledge the importance to work together between the government and the civil society. And the civil society organizations in the Philippines is vibrant, it's vocal, and it really puts the tough questions on the table, which is necessary for all of us to internalize and move forward. So with that, I couldn't say it in any other way, but the opportunities for the Philippines is so obvious. And I really do hope that we from UNFPA can take advantage of that in our work in the country, regionally and globally. And we are all very much looking forward to the leadership of the government of the Philippines when the United Nations in a few weeks' time is addressing the importance of investing in sexual and reproductive health and rights to achieve sustainable development. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let me now just again thank the University of the Philippines through Dr. Elena Pernia, and to thank NIDA through the Undersecretary General Jose Miguel de la Rosa for your hospitality and for the commitment you are placing towards the ICPD and its achievement and the Nairobi commitments. And of course, our 4 panelists and the moderator, a million thanks for being so open and vocal about what needs to be done in order to accelerate the pace in the Philippines. And of course, all of you in the audience, ladies and gentlemen, really thank you for taking the time to be with us today and to make sure, and I hope on behalf of UNFPA, that you will bring these ideas with you in your own work in the country, and perhaps, if I may, as a former diplomat, suggest that this is being reported back to your respective capitals so that we can continue this important work globally, regionally in Asia and the Pacific, and in the Philippines. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. We'd like to ask Mr. Anderson to please stay on the stage. Mr. Anderson, because among other things, thank you for that final message. And this would not be a proper event hosted in the Philippines if we did not have our photo opportunity with all of our speakers and all of our panelists. We'd like to invite everybody back up here on the stage, as well as if they're here, our hosts from the University of the Philippines. But again, we'd like to invite our speakers, everybody who took part in the program, and all our panelists as well. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Mr. Ben De Leon, could we have you up here as well? And we'd like to remind the media in the audience that after this, please head upstairs for the media event. We'll have a small press conference starting at around 3:30, immediately after this program. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Thank you again. Thank you again for everyone who joined us in this program. Thank you for joining us in our multi-stakeholder forum. We hope that by working together, we can ensure quality, effective, and concrete ways forward to gain traction to accelerate the pace of the achievement of our 3 transformative results for the Philippines, as well as ending adolescent pregnancies by 2030 with the collective efforts of various stakeholders, led by government and including all of us, including all of you. Maraming salamat po. And again, for the media in attendance, please feel free to head upstairs. After this program, we will have a press conference. And thank you. Maraming salamat po. Magandang araw sa kanila lahat.